Hey there! You may be watching this video because you're fed up with the direction your health has been taking, and you're interested in losing weight and turning around your chronic diseases, things like type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and heart disease. But you're afraid you're going to fail again. And I'm no different from any of you watching this today. I had a 20-year track record of being 20 pounds or more overweight. I became disgusted with the insane exercise requirements, the continual mild hunger, the need to maintain a massive burst of willpower every day of my life for the next 40 years until I die. I thought this just can't be the way our bodies were designed, that we have to expend a superhuman amount of effort to just avoid being obese, ill, and infirm. So I was amazed when, after switching to a whole food plant-based diet, that I was not hungry for the first time in my life. Can you imagine how much better your long day at work can be if you never get hungry? I have cared for patients who have had open heart surgery after having their heart valves destroyed taking appetite suppressant drugs. If they would have had the right information, they could have just instead eaten an inexpensive, high fiber, whole food plant based diet, lost weight painlessly, and improved or even reversed their chronic diseases at the same time. But unfortunately, we have a healthcare system that is a fee-for-service model. And so a specialty physician can frequently make just as much money in an hour performing an invasive procedure as they can in a solid week of office visits. And this is not to say that invasive procedures are never needed or that every physician thinks that this is a great system. But because of the emphasis on expensive treatments and medication, focused attention to address the underlying cause of chronic disease, and it's the food, is simply not taught in medical schools, and hence most physicians are just not familiar with nutrition as a treatment modality. Many physicians have never seen one patient that follows a whole food plant-based diet, and many assume that this diet should be so hard to follow that they really don't even bother looking into it. I've been a cardiac RN for 27 years, and I didn't know anything about reversing chronic disease with nutrition until my husband developed diabetes. Then I started doing my own research, and I discovered the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which is this medical specialty group that focuses on research-backed prevention, treatment, and even reversal of chronic diseases like diabetes with lifestyle changes, primarily focusing on plant-based nutrition. So I went on to get a board certification in lifestyle medicine, and I began teaching live and online courses to spread this life-saving information to people who are just sick and tired of being sick and tired. So if you're interested in achieving results like Janet, who in 7 weeks dropped her total cholesterol by 47 points, dropped her LDL, the bad cholesterol, by 35 points, and lost 20 pounds, or Robert, who has type 2 diabetes, lowered his fasting blood sugars from 140s to 107 in just 2 months, dropped his metformin from 2,000 milligrams a day to cutting it all under his doctor's supervision in 2 months, or like Mary, who had trouble walking up a set of stairs to get to her doctor's office. She typically had to rest on each step, but after only 10 days of switching to our diet plan, she was able to walk straight up the stairs to her doctor's office without stopping. And her doctor was so impressed that he said he was going to try plant-based diet as well. And here's the kicker. Contrary to the popular belief in the medical field that a plant-based diet is too hard for anyone to realistically stick to, this is the easiest diet I've ever followed in my life. I don't even consider it a diet anymore. It's just the normal way we eat now. A whole food plant-based diet is not just salads and kale. I try to tell my students to think of it as beans and rice, mashed potatoes, mushroom gravy, hearty vegetable chilies, mushroom stroganoff, black bean brownies, and then we add some fruit and vegetables on top of that. You get to explore all sorts of new and exciting ethnic foods, watch your taste buds spring back to life in this hyper-nourishing environment. This is not hard. Why? Because the fiber in whole food plants fills us up and no willpower is required. We can typically only maintain a willpower diet for about 3 weeks, but I've maintained my college weight now for 4 years. I held on to my fat clothes for 1.5 years because I couldn't believe that the weight was just staying off. But then I finally just cleaned out my closet and gave them all away. And you can too. So let's get started. First of all, I want to thank you for joining me to learn how to change your food and change your life. So, and first of all, I want to congratulate you for taking that first step to take charge of your health Whether you are super excited to learn more or you've been dragged here against your will and made to watch this webinar, you are welcome. I come from 27 years of working with people from all walks of life within the mainstream medical system, and I am convinced that plant-based nutrition is for everyone. We just are frequently on different trajectories as to how fast that we're going to make that change. But all that's required to get started is an open mind and a willingness to try some new food. So let's get started. You're probably wondering, who is this person? So let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Stephanie Spencer, and I've been an RN for 27 years. I've worked mostly in cardiology, which gives me a bit of perspective about the number one cause of death in this country. I spent almost 2 decades directing an outpatient heart failure clinic, and then I also developed home infusion therapy programs for end-stage heart failure patients with some hardcore like IV medicine that bridged them to heart transplants and artificial hearts. But really the term for what I did was simply chronic disease management. And this is a term that really encompasses the vast majority of what we do as a healthcare system today. And for years, I watched my patients suffer and have their lives upended by diseases that all have one thing in common. They are all largely caused by the food that we eat, and they are all largely preventable. So in 2019, I had gotten to the point where I was just ready for a change. So I took a completely different path and I started a microgreens business. I wasn't even plant-based at the time, but I had just heard that microgreens were healthy and I wanted to work more with food and health. And so I sold this product at farmers markets on Saturday and to a bunch of restaurants. But right about the same time, oddly enough, fate intervened and diet nutrition became suddenly very relevant in our personal lives. So, my husband Paul had started complaining about having these fatty tumors in his belly. And he'd gone to the doctor in the past and they said it's not cancer, it's just a fatty tumor. But he said, like, these tumors just kept spreading and getting bigger and bigger. And so finally, Paul broke down and said, like, I'm just going to go to the doctor and get these checked out. And Paul's a regular guy. He hates going to the doctor. So I was like, good, you're going to go in and you're going to get all your annual blood work that you need. And so he did go into the doctor. Doctor gets them all checked out and then calls him a couple days later with his lab results. And Paul is not medical at all. He's a history teacher. And so what Paul hears and what he told me that the doctor said is that everything is fine, but something about your hemoglobin, something about his hemoglobin level. And when I heard that, I was aghast. And I told him I wanted to see those labs in my hand. So he got them. And sure enough, I was right. That hemoglobin level didn't have anything to do with his blood count. It was his hemoglobin A1C. And that's a measure of diabetes. Paul was actually pre-diabetic. And I was mortified because I thought we were healthy and I had cared for patients my entire adult life that were dying from diseases like heart failure that caused by heart attacks. Heart attacks are caused by diabetes. I know that diabetes is only a one-way street when you go the conventional route of medications and insulin. It never turns around on its own. It only gets worse and worse. And so, yeah, I was highly motivated to do whatever I could to prevent that because diabetes will frequently progress to full-blown complications like wounds. We have trouble with our circulation, and then onto the heart attacks, then onto the heart failure, then onto kidney failure, dialysis. Or I actually had this vision in my head of me pushing him down the hallway in a wheelchair to go to that little picture down there on the bottom is the hyperbaric wound clinic. To get these hyperbaric treatments or like long-term IV antibiotics. I mean, like I used to care for patients doing all these things. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I was highly motivated to get this diabetes turned around ASAP. And so I had actually seen a documentary called What the Health about 6 weeks earlier or 6 months earlier as I was doing laundry. And mind you, I've been a nurse for like 26 years at that point. I learned that you could reverse diabetes with a whole food plant-based diet from this documentary. I had never heard that in the medical field my entire career. And I had never seen diabetes ever reverse or get better on the traditional American Diabetes Association diet and then all the metformin and the insulin. The ADA diet is a traditional count your carbs diet, limit your carbs. So yeah, I knew that doesn't really ever work. And so I was so motivated. As soon as I had that blood work in my hand, I looked at Paul and I told him, we're going to switch to a plant-based diet. And luckily he didn't fight me. So we did. And 4 months later, we checked his blood work and he was right back within the normal range. We both lost 20 pounds. We slept better. We had more energy. I mean, so at that point, I was absolutely hooked on plant-based nutrition. And so I began researching the science behind it, which led me to getting a certification in plant-based nutrition through the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. And then I also ended up getting a board certification in lifestyle medicine through the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And this is a physician specialty group that is dedicated purely to reversing chronic disease, or preventing, treating, and reversing chronic disease with lifestyle things like nutrition, exercise, avoiding risky substances, like decreasing stress, well-being, things like that. So so I began teaching classes for people that are suffering from chronic disease and wanted to be empowered to do something about it. So I started out in person. I rented out a room and 36 people showed up. This was in early 2020. Great time, right? And then after COVID hit, I had to switch it to an online format. And so, so many people have gone through my course, and I've been so gratified to see so many of my students reverse their diabetes, their kidney disease, their blood pressure, lose stubborn weight, improve GI problems, on and on. I have never seen anything like this within the regular medical field. It's the most fun I've had my entire life. So that's my story. Now let's talk about why many of you may be watching this webinar right now. By middle age, many of us are just not particularly pleased with the direction our health is taking. And we figured out at this point that we're not bulletproof anymore. And this is when we start getting prescriptions for things like statins for high cholesterol. Like we start to get our high blood pressure. We get meds for that. We might have some cancer scares, or we get the pre-diabetes. We start developing these problems that are called chronic disease. And the common denominator in all of this chronic disease is that it is largely caused by our diet. And all of these illnesses comprise about 80% of all of our healthcare spending as a nation. Chronic disease, the way it's currently treated, does not go away. Have you ever asked your doctor, when you get prescribed a statin, how long do I have to take this pill? And you might notice that they have a little smirk, or they're kind of surprised that you asked that, because the answer is forever. We don't think you'll ever come off that. We've never seen anyone just get better with the meds. We are only treating the symptoms, and the conditions will just keep worsening year after year. Every patient that I've ever referred for a heart transplant has been on a statin, okay? Didn't do much good. Many of us have already switched to boneless, skinless chicken breast, yogurt, salmon on our salads, and yet our high blood pressure and diabetes still persist. Every patient, I told you about the statins. Anyway, these drugs and procedures, they don't cure our most common diseases because we're only treating the symptoms of the disease while ignoring the cause. But the good news is, once we pinpoint the cause of the disease, it's the food, we can treat it, and we can frequently even reverse many of these chronic diseases. The modern medical system that we have today is distinguished by doctors who specialize in various procedures to treat the diseases caused by the food we eat. Almost every specialty is built on the performance of a procedure that treats a preventable foodborne illness, things like colonoscopies, coronary stents, the bypass surgery, transurethral resection of the prostate. Yes, this is very prominent in high animal protein societies, dialysis, kidney failure, diabetic wounds, and on and on and on. And those of us in the medical field, we just get to the point where we accept the fact that most humans are just going to need these procedures, much as we accept the inevitability of death and taxes. And lots of times in the medical field, they assume the reason must be due to some genetic cause, because we think our patients are simply eating what is culturally considered normal food. But in the rest of the presentation here, I'm going to talk about, is it normal or not? So, what we consider normal food is what we call the standard American diet here. And this is a pie chart that reflects the typical American diet. And these food choices really neatly reflect our rates of chronic disease. So the majority of our diet, you see this yellow Pac-Man here, 63%. This is processed food. And these are foods that have really been gone through a factory, have had the fiber taken out of them, have had added salt, sugar, and fat. So that they're hyper palatable, so that we want to eat a whole lot. And you can tell by that pie chart, we do eat mostly highly processed foods. Um, and they have very little nutritional value. For example, I used to always eat. I would go out for lunch, my last job, and I'd get a roast beef sandwich at the sub shop. And so the roast beef sandwich is white bread. It's yummy, has no fiber in it. Then I've got my meat and cheese. That's like 25% of our diet is typically animal protein. All no animal protein has any fiber, so that's bereft of fiber. Then the only veggie is like the lettuce and the two tomatoes that came on top, and that's pretty much what we get as far as plant food is about 12% of our calories is things that grow out of the ground, but half of this 12% is highly processed plant foods like potato chips and french fries. And that's what I would get, the chips with my sub. And so really it's only about 5% of our diet, which is like the little sprinkling of iceberg lettuce or the tomato on my sub or whatever. That's the amount of whole food plants that we're getting. And that's why we're so sick. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. There's zero fiber, like I said, in the meat and the dairy, but our bodies require fiber. And an average American only gets 15 grams of fiber a day, and heart disease and cancer are the number one and number two leading causes of death. But the average Ugandan gets an average of 100 grams of fiber a day. And they have hospitals that have virtually no recorded instances of heart attacks or colon cancer ever. It's the food. Most Americans will end up spending an average of 17 years in poor health, with the last 9 of those years being debilitated. And I usually entered the scene during the last 3 years of my patient's debilitated phase, which is why I've decided to dedicate the remainder of my career to reversing these diseases whenever possible. But in contrast to the typical American experience of declining health starting at middle age, there are several places in the world where people don't suffer any of these chronic diseases that affect almost all Americans. In fact, prior to the exportation of American fast food to about every corner of the globe, about 60% of the world's population ate in an entirely different way and didn't have any of these American diseases of affluence. These are called the blue zones, right? And so we have Costa Rica, we have the island of Sardinia. This is Loma Linda in California, the Tarahumara Indians of northern Mexico, rural Africa, Okinawa, Uganda. So these are called the blue zones, and people live full lives regularly up into their 100s as centenarians, and they don't suffer any chronic disease. They're not debilitated, they're not wearing diapers, they're not institutionalized, they're out chopping wood or doing yoga like this lady here. So what kind of diet do you think they're eating? Do you think they're all doing like the South Beach diet, or maybe like Jenny Craig, maybe getting all their portions mailed to them? Yeah, we know that's ridiculous. They're all following a whole food plant-based diet, okay? But different cultures eat different foods, and some of these, or all of these cultures actually do eat some animal protein, but it's a very small amount of their diet, maybe 5 to 10% of total caloric intake. So this by the research, these are the diets that have shown to be the most health promoting because they are full of fiber. Some are corn based, some have barley, fava beans, wild greens, rice. Starchy tubers, legumes, locally available fruits and vegetables. But yeah, this is contrasted. Their healthy lifespan is contrasted with the average American lifespan of 76 years, which is dropping every year now. And then we'll spend the last 17 years of our life in declining health. So yeah, the question you want to ask yourself is, which of these two pictures do you want to have during the remaining years of your life? I know which one I want. So instead of approaching dietary wisdom from a gut feeling about what feels right, or just worse, trying to make sense out of all the industry-sponsored nutritional studies marketed to media outlets, let's try a more methodical approach. After 27 years of working in and around hospitals and with the number one cause of death, heart disease, I think it's best to work backwards. So my approach is to look at what are the main disease states that sicken and kill most Americans. These are conditions that almost all of my patients that came into my clinic have. And let's just look at the research that has been demonstrated to prevent and even reverse these diseases. Let's start with the problems and see what research shows can reverse it and go from there. Okay. So, we're going to start with diabetes. And diabetes and obesity just seem to go hand in hand. And the incidence of diabetes and obesity has almost tripled over the last 30 years, which you can see in this map. As the states get darker and darker, that's higher and higher rates of diabetes and obesity. In my course, we discussed the food industry and the agricultural trends that have gone hand in hand with this epidemic. So at this point, about 10.5% of the United States population is diagnosed with diabetes. By the time we get to be adults over age 20, 37% of the population has pre-diabetes and diabetes. And by the time we get to age 65, over half the population, 51%, will have diabetes or pre-diabetes. And why is diabetes a big deal? Because it wreaks havoc on our arteries. You are as old as your arteries, okay? And that's usually the cause of all our problems later in life. Things like leads to heart attacks, wounds, end organ failure, things like this. So this is why, like, diabetes is like the mouth of the Mississippi. That is the wellspring of all of our chronic disease problems. And what's the conventional wisdom about the proper diet for diabetes? Count your carbs, right? No sugar, limit fruit. And so that's what we've been doing for, I don't know how long, 50 years or so. Have we wiped out diabetes with that diet? No, but Asian cultures have very low rates of diabetes prior to American fast food coming their way, and they ate a diet that was approximately 65 to 80% carbs. Okay, so the low carb diet is not the answer to reversing diabetes. So first, we need to understand what type 2 diabetes is and how insulin works in our bodies. So let's just go back and look at the big picture. When we eat food, our digestive system turns it into glucose, which is then coursing through our bloodstream. And glucose is our fuel that our bodies run on. So the glucose needs to go from the bloodstream into the cells, okay? And so it's as if and you can see in this picture here, it looks like our cell walls, in effect, have a bunch of little locks on them, okay? And the insulin functions as a key to unlock the locks on our cell wall and to allow the glucose to go from the bloodstream into the muscle cells, okay? And so insulin acts like an escort for that glucose. All right, so that's how glucose metabolism functions normally, the way it should work. And all day long, our glucose levels are just ebbing and flowing from the bloodstream and being then soaked up into the cells, right? But what happens in the case of type 2 diabetes? Well, we were able to get some new information in around 2006. We got a new technology called MR spectroscopy, magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and that allowed us to look inside the cell walls of diabetics. And we were able to see that type 2 diabetics tended to have this fat buildup on the muscle cell walls. And so what happens is this is called basically insulin resistance. What happens when you get fat buildup on the walls of your muscle cells? We're eating our food, we get the glucose in our bloodstream along with the insulin, and the insulin needs to still open up those locks, but the fat is clogging up the locks on the cell wall. It's kind of like if a kid plays a trick on you and gums up your car lock with bubble gum, right? You can't get your key in. That's what happens here. The insulin cannot make it from the bloodstream into the cell because it's gummed up with that fat. And so therefore it can't escort the glucose from the bloodstream into the cell. And then glucose is going to build up into higher and higher levels in the bloodstream. And then the owner of the bloodstream is going to not feel good and go to the doctor. Usually the first symptoms of diabetes are being really thirsty, being really hungry, and losing a lot of weight. So when you go to the doctor and tell them that, they're going to check your blood work, and sure enough, they're going to diagnose you with diabetes and frequently start you on some medication. So it's important to understand with that buildup of fat on the cell walls, that fat is basically making the cell resist the insulin. So this is the definition of insulin resistance, okay? But that was we've really had a lot of nutritional research breakthroughs in the last 15 years. And this is one of the major ones that diabetes is not just caused by eating too many candy bars and too much sugar. I mean, sugar is not good for you, but it is really an effect of chronic fat buildup. Builds up on the cells, also builds up on our liver, and then it starts to build up on our pancreas. Um, so yeah. So then there was a doctor named, oh, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. All right. So why do we seem to be getting more and more of this fat buildup across the population as each year goes by? Well, let's take a look at this. So from USDA data, we can see that our diet has really fundamentally changed in the last 100 years. Our meat intake, think 100 years ago, we didn't have Costco's to go to where we can just buy super cheap meat and just load it up. We didn't even have good refrigeration or freezers for that matter, right? So our meat intake has drastically increased in the last 100 years. We've gone from 90 pounds per person per year to 216 pounds. That's a lot of meat per person per year. That's an increase of 140%. Let's look at the cheese. We've gone from 3 pounds per person per year to 27 pounds per capita per year. Cheese used to be kind of more of a European type of food, and Americans didn't necessarily eat that much cheese 100 years ago. But I talk about the reasons that the cheese intake has increased, and a lot of it has to do with choices by the USDA in marketing. But yeah, that's an increase of 800%. And cheese is 70% fat. So we're starting to see where all this excess fat is coming from that can start to build up on those muscle cells, causing insulin resistance. Oil has increased from 4 pounds per person per year 100 years ago to 70 pounds a year. That is an increase of 1,650%. We didn't used to have just aisles full of potato chips and Doritos if you even had much access to a grocery store 100 years ago. So yeah, you can really see that we are getting a whole lot more fat in our diet than we ever normally did, even though we tend to think like, oh, everyone ate lard and everything 100 years ago. They really didn't eat as much easily available and super cheap meat, cheese, and deep fried products. So there was a doctor named Neil Bernard that had a hypothesis that a low-fat plant-based diet would perhaps undo insulin resistance that was caused by the fat clogging the cellular locks, basically in the cells. And he thought that a plant-based diet would perhaps melt away that fat and reverse the insulin resistance, reverse the diabetes. And so he did a randomized controlled trial. It was funded by the National Institutes of Health. And he compared an ADA, which is the typical American Diabetic Association diet, to a vegan diet with no meat, no dairy, and very minimal to no refined oil. Okay. And it turns out that, remember, the goal was to melt the fat out of the cell walls, right? And sure enough, lo and behold, the vegan diet was 3 times more effective at reducing that A1C number, that long-term measure of diabetes, by 3 times more than the standard American Diabetic Association diet. It lowered the patient's LDL cholesterol, that's the bad cholesterol, twice as much as the ADA group. And it lowered the vegan group, or the vegan group lost twice as much weight as the ADA group and discontinued twice as many medications as the ADA group, which is significant. All right. How fast can these changes happen? There's another study that demonstrated that patients that were taking insulin and switched to a plant-based diet, but they controlled for weight loss. Okay. Because people can really improve their diabetes if they just lose a bunch of weight, however they would, by whatever means. But they found that if they controlled for weight loss, so they had 2 groups. The study group, they switched them to a plant-based diet, but made them eat so much that they didn't lose any weight, and they didn't like really have them do any particular exercise program. They had a very high fiber plant-based diet. They decreased their insulin requirements by 60%. How long did this take? Only 16 days. So this is what happens when you treat the cause of the insulin resistance. All right, so let's move on now to heart disease, okay? The reason diabetes is such a big deal is that it is a precursor to so many of these other downstream diseases that lead to death, namely heart disease. Perhaps, like many of you that are watching this probably have high cholesterol, high blood pressure, coronary artery disease. You may have already had a stent or a bypass surgery, and you are not alone. About 48% of US adults have cardiovascular disease, according to the American Heart Association. Every 35 seconds, someone in the United States has a heart attack. We hear all about, like 5 shark attacks in the summer and everyone freaks out. But what we don't realize is that every day people are having heart attack after heart attack after heart attack. By the time it takes for you to watch this presentation, approximately 100 people will have had a heart attack. It's a number one cause of death in Western civilization. But lucky for us, there was a curious doctor, a general surgeon named Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, that came along, and he hypothesized that perhaps you could reverse coronary artery disease with a low-fat plant-based diet. And so this picture over here on the left demonstrates a very diseased coronary artery. Like when you have a left heart cath, or they call it a dye test, when they shoot dye up and look at your coronary arteries. And to be clear, like the coronary arteries, say this is our heart. These are the, if you can look at my little video here, these are the arteries that lay on the surface of the heart, and they're really important because your heart muscle needs to always have a blood flow if we want our heart to keep beating. Okay, so this is a really diseased coronary artery. This is what we call the widowmaker, the left anterior descending, and you can see it's just pinched off right there, right? And this gentleman, this is what we call a tortuous lesion. It's just it's not a good candidate for a stent because it's not straight. And he was also not a candidate for bypass surgery. And this is what we call the widowmaker. But so this gentleman talked to Dr. Esselstyn. He switched to a whole food plant-based diet. And then you can see in the next film, he just has a wide open garden hose of a left anterior descending. It is beautiful to look at, right? And so Dr. Esselstyn went on and he performed a study on 17 patients with advanced coronary artery disease, just like this. He switched him to a whole food plant-based diet. And this original group of patients went on to live for 20 years or more and ended up being featured in the documentary Forks Over Knives. There was another doctor, Dr. Dean Ornish, that performed similar studies on heart disease that yielded similar results. And Dr. Ornish started about in the mid-1980s. Originally, Dr. Ornish just hoped to halt the progression of coronary artery disease, which was widely believed, like back then, like in the 50s and 60s. We just thought, heart attacks were just a normal part of aging, and there's just nothing you can do with it. We literally had no idea that it had anything to do with the food. But so Dr. Ornish also switched patients to a plant-based diet, and he was amazed to find that it didn't just halt the progression of the disease, but he really closely tracked these patients with serial angiograms, with serial heart caths, and he found that the plaques could actually shrink or regress. And patients in just 3 weeks on a whole food plant-based diet had a 91% reduction of their chest pain. And to be clear, this doesn't just happen with the arteries on the heart. This happens with the arteries. This reversal of the blockage happens with arteries all throughout your body. That's why we say you're as old as your arteries. We start to have all sorts of problems when we get older because our arteries are clogged up, right? So the arteries that feed the retinas of your eyes, the arteries that get affected by diabetes, we call diabetic retinopathy. The lumbar disc, you can get low back pain because those arteries are clogged up, and the penile arteries get clogged up and cause erectile dysfunction. This is not a lack of manliness. This is simply a clogged blood vessel, and we can reverse this with diet. All right. So what is the diet that is conventionally recommended for heart health? When I've worked in a hospital my whole life, and we always discharged our bypass surgeries on a heart healthy diet, which means basically kind of some vague chicken and salmon recommendation. And but the healthiest diet that we can conceive of in the cardiology world, the traditional world, is a Mediterranean diet, which is kind of like that salmon and olive oil thing. But Dr. Esselstyn, with his whole food plant-based diet, he is famous for saying, in regards to diets like the heart healthy diet or the Mediterranean diet, that moderation kills. And Esselstyn was sort of ostracized a little bit in the medical community after his original study in the early 90s. They said that his results just couldn't be replicated in the real world because, and like he only got those results because of his militant zeal and his like mind control over his patients. So he said, all right, you know what? He did a repeat study in 2014 with a much larger group. So he had a group of 177 patients, and he just gave them 5 hours of instruction on a whole food plant-based diet and tracked them for 3.7 years. And these were all patients that have had a heart attack. Okay, so they're heart attack survivors. And then he compared that to the Mediterranean diet when patients switched from a standard American diet to a Mediterranean diet. And of the patients that, like heart attack patients that switched to a Mediterranean diet, still in the 3.7 years following, 25% of them still went on to have a major cardiac event, which is a heart attack, stroke, or death. But in the whole food plant-based Esselstyn diet, and this is a strict diet with 0 oil and 6 servings of leafy greens a day, only 1 patient out of 177. That is a 0.6% rate of major cardiac events compared to 25%. This is a 40-fold improvement on the Mediterranean diet for keeping patients heart attack proof. So this, in the medical field, nothing is ever 100%, but this is a virtual cure for heart disease. So if I were playing Russian roulette, I would want the 0.6% chance versus a 25% chance of having a major cardiac event. All right. So what is the most common question that everyone has when we talk about plant-based nutrition? Where do you get your protein? Okay. So the best way to compare 2 sources of protein, all right, we're going to put this to rest, is comparing calorie by calorie, okay? So we are comparing 100 calories of meat, which is about 3 slices, with 100 calories of broccoli, which is about a stalk and a half, okay? The meat has, or the steak has 6.4 grams of protein in 100 calories. I wonder if the broccoli, I wonder where that's gonna fall. How many of you think it's gonna have less protein? Raise your hand. All right, let's see here. Oh my goodness. The broccoli has 11.1 grams of protein. It's almost twice as much as the steak. So it's time you found out the truth. The world is not like it was we learned in 5th grade, right? We were told that meat is 100% protein and vegetables or potatoes or whatever, or those are 100% carbs, and then you have your fat. In reality, all plants are a combination of protein, fat, and carbohydrates. Okay, so we do get protein from all our plants. They're just in a slightly different configuration of amino acids. I'm going to talk about that later. All right, what about the other crucial nutrients we need? Can we get enough calcium? Can we get enough iron? So these are the nutrients that are present in 100 calorie portions. So we're comparing the 2 very different foods. We're comparing them by equal caloric amounts. That's the most accurate way to compare the nutrient contents of 2 different food types. So if we look at the calcium, broccoli, 322 milligrams of calcium compared to 2.4 milligrams in the steak. The iron, 3.5 milligrams in broccoli, almost 5 times more than 0.7 milligrams in the steak. Okay. Fiber, 4.7 grams. Steak has 0 fiber. Remember, all animal protein, all meat, all dairy, all eggs, all fish, there is 0 fiber in any animal products. We require fiber for health. We have very high levels of antioxidants and phytochemicals, which are plant chemicals. These are also required for us to thrive and be healthy. We cannot be healthy without antioxidants and phytochemicals. Let's see, let's look down here. Cholesterol. Cholesterol is the only thing that the plant doesn't have that the steak, that the animal protein has plenty of. 0 cholesterol in the broccoli, 5.5 milligrams in the steak. We do not require any cholesterol from dietary sources. Our liver can make all of the cholesterol that we need. And doctors used to really believe that you had to get excess, like cholesterol from your diet. And now we know that we can get cholesterol levels as low as possible. And people do very well with that based on the research. So, yeah, this is a really good thing to remember when you're wondering, can I get all of the vitamins and minerals that I need on a plant-based diet? And yeah, and all plants contain fiber, and that is what is required to promote health, especially gut health. That's what we all run on. All right, now we're going to look at the two most important factors to unlock optimum health. Okay. Number one, step number one is we want to maximize nutrient density. And it's really instructive here to look at the relative different levels of nutrient density between the plants and between the animal protein. All right. So, yeah, nutrient density. When we're talking nutrients, we mean micronutrients, which are vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and phytonutrients. This is what's required for health. And the highest nutrient dense foods are the leafy greens, okay, like up here at 100. All right. And then if you look here, the solid green vegetables, like they are a little bit less. Starchy vegetables go even lower. But still, lots of nutrient density here. Okay. This is on a scale of 0 to 100. So we're going from kale up here at 100 all the way down to cotton candy at 0 here. Okay. But let's look at where the meat or the animal protein kicks in. The most nutrient dense animal protein is fish at 15. That's right here. Look how low that is on the scale. All of your animal protein is down here at the bottom of the nutrient density scale. Potatoes have much more micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants than meat. Okay. Look at where cheese is. Cheese is a 3. Cheese is 3 points away from cotton candy on the nutrient density scale, and it is 70% fat. So why do we feed cheese to our children? And it's also chock full of hormones from the cows too, like estrogen. So these are not generally these are not nutrient dense foods, and yeah, it's really important. If we could just switch all of our food being to nutrient dense plants, your health will transform. Um, Key number two to unlocking optimum health is maximizing hormonal favorability. Okay. And there's different hormones that the food that we eat will give our bloodstream varying levels of different hormones. And when I heard this explanation for the first time from Dr. Joel Furman about animal protein versus plant protein, it completely changed my nutritional worldview. So, animal and plant protein affect our body's hormonal responses in different ways. One is health promoting and one is disease promoting. So, it's important to understand that all protein is comprised of amino acids, okay? Like 22 amino acids. And 9 of these amino acids are what we call essential amino acids, meaning we have to obtain these amino acids from our food, okay? And all animal protein has has very high levels of all of these 9 essential amino acids. And so for basically 150 years since we discovered the macronutrient of protein, we have believed that animal protein is the superior source because of those essential amino acids being in high levels. However, later research has shown us that these high levels of amino acids that are like, as soon as we put that animal protein in our mouth, we're getting the high levels of all 9 amino acids. What that does when we eat the food in the what we call the complete form, which is the animal protein high amino acid form, our liver starts to kick out high levels of a hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1. And insulin-like growth factor 1 is a hormone that makes our body want to be in the mood to grow blood vessels. And so what will happen, it'll start to stimulate the growth of new blood vessels. And this is called angiogenesis. Angio means blood vessel and genesis means creation of. And that becomes problematic because if you have a little cancer cell in your body that's floating around, a mutated cancer cell, and we all have these, it's important to understand that cancer doesn't just pop out of the blue when we have a scan and discover it at age 56. These little cells have been doubling for years and years and years. Most cells have been doubling for 8 to 10 years before they're visible on a scan. So that is called the tumor doubling rate. Okay. So yeah, if we have a little cancer cell maybe in our abdomen or something, and then we're eating high amounts of animal protein, which is greater than 10% of caloric intake, is what the research has demonstrated will start to make chronic disease take off. Okay. And there's really no level at which there's like the regression curve goes all the way down to zero. So, yeah, we really want to minimize animal protein for this reason. So if we have a mutated cancer cells have IGF-1 receptors on them. And then if we have high levels of IGF-1 floating around in our bloodstream, it's going to make our body want to grow lots of little blood vessels like capillaries to feed these cancer cells. And it will make them grow, grow, grow. And remember at the beginning, I told you the story of my husband that had the fatty tumors in his belly that were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we never know what to like. My whole life, I've like people have fatty tumors. I've never heard anyone have an explanation as to why these exist, and so we switched to a plant-based diet. Within about 2 months, those fatty tumors on Paul's belly started shrinking up, and they just shrunk, 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 and they went away because we had switched our protein source to plants. Okay. So when we eat plants, the amino acid composition in the plants is variable. Okay. The essential amino acids, some levels are high, some are low. But basically when we eat different plants, the different amino acid levels will combine together in our gut to create a complete protein in our gut. And that is the healthiest way for us to get protein, is for it to be turned into the complete form in our gut. That makes us have low levels of insulin-like growth factor 1. Okay. And so if we have low levels of IGF-1, we have low levels of angiogenesis or growing blood vessels. And in fact, when you switch from your protein being from animal sources to plant sources, those extra blood vessels can simply retract. Okay. And that's what we want to do. All right. And it's funny. I remember where I was in my car when I heard this IGF-1 explanation from Dr. Furman. And that's when it dawned on me that no meat at all. Like I used to think it was, oh, if you raise the cows like grass fed instead of corn fed, that's what makes all the difference, omega-3 versus omega-6. But this, like understanding this explanation of IGF-1 and cancer promotion, it doesn't matter how perfectly you raise this cow. You could sing it lullabies and be covered in rainbows and tulips. It is still going to promote cancer because that's just the intrinsic nature of complete animal protein. It's changed my entire worldview when I learned this. All right. And it's also important to note, the more rapidly that an animal grows, the sooner that it will get cancer. Okay. And so a mammal grows. So we're taking a simian human body that evolved from apes that eat 95% fruit, and we're feeding us the diet of a mountain lion. Not even mountain lions, they don't eat meat 3 times a day like many of us do. So gives you a little perspective there. All right. So how do we define success? I used to literally teach a class called Success with Heart Failure. And my definition of success for my heart failure patients, this was defined by the Affordable Care Act. These were the metrics that I had to keep my patients within, was just keeping them out of the hospital for 31 days. We had a 30-day readmission rate that I had to prevent my patients from going in. And so like what I had to do was just like juggle 30 different aspects of their heart failure treatment to try to keep them from filling up with fluid. And it was really tedious, juggling meds, statins, insulin, like these are the kind of things we do in the medical field. And that was the best I could do, is like health for them was sitting at home taking these pills. Right. But let's look at success with a plant-based diet. This is a lady that was on, she had heart failure, and she was actually on hospice. She had an ejection fraction of 10%, which means that her left ventricle was just barely squeezing. And her daughter had heard about Dr. Esselstyn's book. And so her daughter switched her to a whole food plant-based diet. And within, I think it was maybe like 6 to 8 months, she started getting better. She actually got discharged from hospice. And then this is her about 10 years later. Okay. She just completely reversed the heart failure. And I'll tell you, I have never seen that happen in all the years that I've cared for heart failure patients. And her daughter went on to found a business that sells whole food, plant-based, no oil meals through the mail. It's called Mama Says, MAMASEZZ.com. But yeah, this is the difference between traditional treatment and plant-based nutrition. When we address the underlying cause of the disease, we aren't just managing symptoms anymore. We are eliminating symptoms because we have treated the cause. Chest pain can resolve after 3 weeks. We can start decreasing blood pressure meds after about 2 weeks. Frequently lower back pain, finger pain, joint and knee pain will start to go away after about 2 weeks. We start weaning off of many meds. We start having steady weight loss, more energy, and a heightened sense of well-being, and even decreased depression scores based on the research on a plant-based diet. All right, so let's talk real quick about the difference between a vegan diet and the difference between a whole food plant-based diet. So a vegan diet focuses primarily on animal welfare and is defined by what it doesn't eat. So we have no meat, no dairy, no honey or leather, right? But there's no real definition on what you should eat, okay? And there are many vegan, highly processed foods that are just not health promoting. Most of the fake meat and the fake cheese has a whole lot of oil, and it's usually got a whole lot of coconut oil, which is the highest saturated fat oil there is, and it is not good for you. It will skyrocket your cholesterol levels. So just because like beer and French fries are vegan, that is not a health promoting diet. And people on a junk food vegan diet can really be very ill, as bad as or even worse than people following a standard American diet. A whole food plant-based diet, however, focuses on whole food plants. Our focus is health promotion and disease reversal. And it's based on the research and the diets of longevity, like these blue zones where people eat food just like it grows out of the ground. The big difference between whole food, plant-based, and vegan is that we avoid or at least greatly minimize refined oil. We are really careful about avoiding oil because that is what is necessary to reverse these chronic disease. I've seen patients that have been vegan for like decades, and they're diabetic and they just cannot get the diabetes reversed because they just can't wean themselves off of vegan junk food. There's different kinds of whole food plant-based diets, a lot of different doctors that have done research. And so we've got like the DASH diet, that's for hypertension, the Ornish and Pritikin diets. These are actually approved by Medicare for heart disease reversal. There's programs where you can go to at many hospitals. The China study by Dr. T. Colin Campbell, Furman, Bernard, Esselstyn diets are all variations of plant-based diets. Many of these diets do allow small amounts of animal protein. So that is different from a pure vegan diet. But generally, the more you let go of animal protein, the better results you will get. But frequently on these diets, what they'll allow is animal protein on major holidays. That's really the cutoff that a lot of them will make. And at the beginning, that's what I recommend too. It's best to be off completely, but if you can at least at the beginning try to just keep it to major holidays. That's not going to throw you off track generally. Okay, so now let's talk about what makes up the whole food plant-based plate. You're probably used to the food pyramid or the My Plate. With the whole food plant-based diet, we are eating, I don't want you to think of just salads and kale. Let's talk about legumes and whole grains. Think of beans and rice. And then we're going to have some fruits and vegetables. Everything we eat actively promotes health, and we are focusing on quality instead of restricting quantity. So there's no slavish measuring of portions with a whole food plant-based diet at all. You eat healthy food, full of fiber, and you eat as much as you want. No portion restrictions. It is the dietary pattern that matters, okay? And yeah, it's not just salads and kale. We can eat things like, these are some of my favorite, oatmeal, lemon pancakes here. You can have air fried potatoes. You make them in an air fryer with no oil, or French fries with no oil. We can have like shepherd's pie with mushrooms and lentils and carrots. Oh my gosh, it's just delicious. You can make air fried or convection baked onion rings, portobello burgers. You can make like little sauces out of silken tofu or cashew cream. We can have hearty chilies with avocado. It's just delicious. There are so many options that we have on a plant-based diet. And yes, even pudding. So after we switched to a plant-based diet, I was really amazed at how easy it was. Remember, I thought it was going to be miserable and we were just going to have to white knuckle through the diet, right? Just to reverse Paul's diabetes. But then I realized once we started, I just could not believe how easy it was. And I had spent decades in chronic disease management, and I thought, why don't I just create a program for chronic disease reversal? It's just like everyone's got it and everyone just needs the same information. So that's what I did. So in this course, I get you jump started with a bunch of shortcuts. Okay. So we're going to start off making it as easy as possible. You're going to have a plant-based pantry shopping list. You're going to have a lab worksheet so you know what labs you're going to plug in your existing labs, and you're going to see the disease-proof goals that you want to aim for. We check this beforehand and after, okay? We're going to have instructions to integrate plant-based nutrition in with your non-plant-based doctor's visit. So this is a really important part. Not very many people have access to a plant-based doctor, but I give you lots of resources that you can print off and hand to your regular doctor that explain from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. They explain, and you're actually going to have a 5.5 hour continuing medical education class that they can take for free, courtesy of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, that will explain to them the basics of plant-based nutrition and lifestyle medicine for chronic disease reversal. You're going to have a white paper on the need to, this is for your physician, to understand that we want to aim for reversal of type 2 diabetes instead of just symptom management. This is the position statement of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. We're going to have information on how to deprescribe your meds safely, because that's not something that people do very often in the mainstream medical field, but we do it all the time in lifestyle medicine. So my course is very useful in integrating this whole world of plant-based nutrition in with the existing medical resources that you have in your community. So then we're going to dive into the course material. We are going to learn for 4 weeks why. We're going to learn in-depth information about the research. Then we're going to learn the how. We're going to learn cooking skills to substitute meat and dairy with plant-based recipes. And then after you've developed your cooking skills and you've overcome your initial disorientation, then we dive in 100% for 21 days. No meat, no dairy, no oil. And then we want to recheck the labs afterwards, and also like blood pressure and our weight and body mass index. We're going to compare before and after. And that's when my students really start to appreciate the remarkable changes. Frequently, they'll shed 15 to 20 pounds in this time period. They'll decrease their diabetes and their blood pressure medications. They'll get their relief from arthritis pain and more. So in my old life of running a heart failure clinic, I always knew that my patients just had this underlying smoldering chronic disease that my treatments would never touch. But at the time, I didn't have the knowledge or the tools to address their underlying problems. But now I do. So my content in this class is geared towards all the main chronic diseases that my patients always had. And I remember I used to think, if I just had a magic wand and if I could just make this hypertension and the diabetes and the obesity and the heart disease go away, well, I guess I'd be out of a job, wouldn't I? But anyway, I would love to be able to put us out of a job for that. And so would everyone else. But so the content of my 21-day plant-based challenge course is meant to address all these universal underlying chronic diseases that really pretty much all of us have at middle age. So class 1, we start off with where do you get your protein? 2 hours of very in-depth discussion, way more than what I went over today. And you will understand it from beginning to end, and you'll be able to explain it to other skeptical people, all the nutrition experts that start asking you where you're going to get your protein. Class 2, we're going to talk about preventing and reversing diabetes. We're going to talk about different societies that have different dietary patterns. We're going to talk about changes over in our eating patterns over time. You're going to learn all about it and the specific diet and the like percentages of fat that we need for each that the research has been demonstrated to be effective for each of these conditions. Class 3, you're as old as your arteries. That's all about heart disease. Preventing and reversing heart disease, the specific diet that you need, recipes, all sorts of things. Class 4 is weight loss and plant-based nutrition. You're going to learn all about the pleasure trap and our evolutionary history. We have like little worksheets to help you map out like trouble scenarios that you can pre-plan in advance. So here's some of the feedback that I've gotten. Here's from Janine. You pulled together all the information I'd been hearing in snippets into one place, and it was all backed by research and reputable sources. The step-by-step program with the blood work worksheet made it easy to integrate the knowledge in working with my family physician that I love, but she is not plant-based. And having access to you in the group coaching sessions gave me one more point of expert contact to validate that I was on the right track. I will continue to refer to all the information in your course that I printed off and put in my binder, and that's what I recommend you do. You'll have all of my videos. You're going to have a printable PDF of all of my slides, and I recommend you just put it in a binder. You can take notes, and then you can always have that to go back to refer to. So that's what we are all about, is achieving results. So you're also going to have a bunch of worksheets in this class. You're going to have, like I told you, the individualized lab worksheet, the goals worksheet. You're going to sit down and figure out what are your goals. And you're going to put them on your fridge so you can remember why you're doing this. Or if-then contingency plans for defeating weight loss pitfalls. Our homework assignment, you're going to have a fiber assignment. You're going to learn how to, what different, like how many different plant groups you need to get every day in your daily meal plan. You're going to have assignments for the particular dietary requirements for different chronic disease conditions. Then we're going to have lots of social media support. I have a Facebook page for whole food plant-based grocery finds. I have my Facebook page with recipes and tips. And then we have lots of opportunities to connect face-to-face. So you're not just all by yourself. When you purchase the 21-day plant-based challenge, you will get automatically a group coaching session with me. You'll be emailed the link as soon as you enroll, and you can look on the website for the date. And then we have a monthly Food is Medicine Club support group. And so you'll automatically be enrolled in our ongoing monthly support group. And this is a great place to like ask questions. We have plant-based guest speakers, doctors, chefs, and more. So in conclusion, one of the stumbling blocks that I frequently see with this way of eating is that many people are concerned that a whole food plant-based diet is just too much of an extreme imposition on their current habits and their way of life. I mean, I know exactly from a patient's perspective, right when it starts to go off the rails for them. It's when they get their first chronic disease lab results back, usually at middle age, just like my husband's, like a little bit of pre-diabetes or a little bit of steadily rising high blood pressure, and they don't know that this should be the equivalent of an air raid siren going off saying, Mayday, Mayday, you are no longer tolerating the standard American diet. But for years, I cared for end-stage heart failure patients that had their lives upended by this illness. And what causes heart failure? It all starts out with these standard American-induced chronic diseases, either high blood pressure, diabetes, heart attacks, all these things. So speaking of upending your life, my patients would frequently have to move to like the small town where they live to Little Rock in the center of the state, where this is our biggest medical area in the state of Arkansas, where the advanced heart failure therapy doctors were. They would sometimes have to move, rent an apartment, up in their lives. Sometimes their adult children would have to quit their jobs to care for them. And they missed out on creating like memories with their grandchildren because staying on the standard American diet path in the end took away their freedom and their independence. So in my opinion, it's so much better to just take the path at the beginning of switching to a whole food plant-based diet early in the game. A recent study has indicated that switching to a plant based diet, even in our older years, can add a decade or longer to our lifespan. Even people in their 60s were seen to add an additional 8 years to their life by switching to a plant predominant diet. And these will be years worth living. So, let me give you some of the feedback that I've gotten from my patients. Patricia said, I have really appreciated a sharing of nutritional education without hidden agendas, propaganda, or marketing schemes. So refreshing. Beverly said, I took this course because my blood work showed that my kidneys were starting to show signs of decreased functioning. 3 weeks after starting Stephanie's program, we repeated my blood work. And my doctor and I were amazed to see that my kidney function had returned to normal. Pamela said, I appreciate the variety of research presented. It's not just one sourced or one-sided. I love that the class was presented in various stages, and the organized flow of information provided clarity to a lot of the questions that I had. So this is where it's time to make a choice. Your options are, you can continue to just do the same thing you're doing and start to research the invasive treatments that they're probably going to start to recommend. If you're doing the portion restriction diets, it's time to learn to live with just that continual mild sense of hunger that the plan is that we're going to have the rest of our life, right? Option 2, you could try to figure out this plant-based thing on your own. Go to the internet, see why Organic Guru X contradicts Organic Guru Y, try to decipher all these research articles, maybe just do some trial and error over the years. Or you can do option 3, which I recommend, which is just cut out the guesswork. Sometimes you just really need to seek expert opinion when your health is at risk. And the American College of Lifestyle Medicine has taken almost 100 years of research and all the knowledge built from these plant-based pioneers that I kind of briefly referenced here. And we've able to put all of this into an easy step-by-step program so that you don't have to figure all this stuff out from scratch. So right now, if you are ready to purchase the course, what you need to do is click the show notes below here. It says ... more, okay, on YouTube, and you'll find the links to purchase the course right underneath, or you can always go to naturalstateplantbased.com and purchase the course. So in conclusion, I want to thank you for taking the decisive step of choosing to just watch this webinar and learn about the possibility of transforming your health. If you've made it this far, you are the kind of person that's ready to take action. So please hit the subscribe button so that you can see more plant-based nutrition videos from me. And I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes. And this is from Confucius. We have 2 lives, and the second begins when we realize that we only have one. So I'm wishing you all health and hope. Bye-bye.